I want to welcome you to CedarCreek this weekend, where for some of you who are here, it's good to be back, but it doesn't feel normal. And for those of you that call CedarCreek home, who are watching online, it doesn't feel normal. It just doesn't feel the same. We're on this quest to try to resolve some of this angsty uncertainty that we're feeling in our lives. So if that's how you feel, and if you're here for the very first time, man, I'm so glad you're joining us. We are one church with thousands of locations, and our physical locations across Northwest Ohio are now open, and it is so good to be seeing those of you coming week in and week out. And one of the things that I've been waiting for with people back in the room, so I'm going to need your help here, is it's been a little while since we have been able to welcome the men who are watching at TOCI, at Toledo Correctional. So put your hands together to let the men know at TOCI that we're for them, and we're excited to be experiencing the service. And the truth is that we never stopped streaming to Toledo Correctional throughout all of this, even though they have severely cut back the number of visitors, in some cases no visitors at all. It's limited our ability for our team to go in and serve with CR, Celebrate Recovery Inside, but Pastor Rupert has been our point of contact. So Pastor Rupert, if you're watching, thanks. And the men who watch every week, we see you. We're continuing to pray for you. We're cheering for you. And this year, we were able to stream in the Global Leadership Summit, make an investment, not just in the inmates who are there, the men who are there, but also the staff who are there as well. And they're excited to have a rebroadcast of that in a more less COVID-centric environment in a few weeks. And so your generosity, those of you that give here, enable us to do that. And we also had many of you write letters in to the men at Toledo Correctional. And Pastor Rupert's like, man, if we can keep that going. He saw firsthand those practical ways of showing people how much they matter, how it's used by God to make a difference. And so we're going to be ramping that back up again and just providing a tangible way for you to serve the people in our community, even if you can't sit with them face to face. And so I just want to say thanks. Thanks for your generosity at this time. For those of you that give, thanks for giving. For those of you that want to partner with us, the easiest way to do that is to go to cedarcreek.tv/give or do it on our app. Our app is the best resource that we can offer you to get connected here. And so, as we continue our conversation on Norm, open up your apps. And really what we're trying to do is talk about how do we move forward. My hope is to talk about how do we move forward in a world of I don't know. And our goal for today is this. I want to talk about signs that you're stuck and how you can get out of it. Like, what are some signs that you're stuck in the midst of this uncertainty? And is there a way out of being or feeling stuck? Last year at this time, I was finalizing my plans to take my oldest daughter, my oldest child and daughter, Lydia, to Latin America with me. I wanted her to experience firsthand what happens in the third world, but also what happens when a life-giving movement of Jesus followers show up in a community to make a difference. It was going to be her first trip out of the country. She is so excited to go, and so we make plans, and I'm excited because I heard Carlos Gomez, one of my favorite Latin America friends, he's in Costa Rica, was going to be our guide for our time together. And so he's amazing. He knows he's from Honduras, but he just tells great stories. And he's somebody that shows me the way, shows me what to order, takes us fun places, and had a few things picked out for our time together, along with visiting and encouraging the local churches in El Salvador and Honduras. And so weeks before we left, there was this talk of this virus in Wuhan, China, a place I'd never really heard of before. And we were kind of like, it's kind of weird. And, some other countries were starting to hear or talk about the spread of this virus, but, they were on the other side of the ocean. And so there was some concern, but for the most part, we felt like, we've heard this all before. It's not going to happen here. So we decided to go on the trip, and we felt like we would be okay. Nothing too big to really worry about, right? Are they going to shut down the country and quarantine everybody? That's ridiculous. That would never happen. And then 4 days into our trip, the team is calling me about what are we going to do. And I'll never forget Carlos Gomez's face in La Ceiba, Honduras, when he looks in the rearview mirror and he said, "Hey, Ben, can we talk outside of the van?" And I'm thinking, I don't really know. Maybe it's a church-related thing. Maybe something's happening with one of our team members that he's a little concerned about. And as we get out of the vehicle, which my daughter, is paying attention to all this, he's like, I just received news that they've shut down the airport out of the country. Like, can you say that again? Like, shut down the airport? He's like, yeah, so here I am out of the country, and I may be stuck in the country for a long time. I mean, this is the word that I felt right here, stuck. How am I going to tell my daughter? Am I going to tell my daughter, or am I just going to play it off like everything's okay? How am I going to call my wife? What am I going to tell my wife? Hey, me and your oldest daughter are down here in Latin America. No big deal. Everything's going to be great. Stuck. It's a word that rhymes with all sorts of interesting words that capture how we feel when we're stuck, Think about what it rhymes with. It rhymes with words like muck, like you're stuck in mud, or you got hit by a truck, or maybe it's bad luck, or maybe it sucks. I know that's not everybody's favorite word, but it's like there's lots of words that kind of capture how we feel. We feel helpless. We feel overwhelmed. We're not sure how we're going to get out. And sometimes we can feel stuck in a place, in a season, in a country. Other times we feel like something is stuck to us, inside of us, going on in our life that we can't seem to get rid of. And so if that's you, boy, am I really glad that you're here. The first thing that we need to do, the first thing that I needed to do in Honduras is you need to go back, or you need to start with, or you need to continue to pay attention to your guide. Why? Because we talked about this last week. Your guide determines where you go. Your guide is the one who shows you the way. And Carlos Gomez was amazing. And eventually we got out of the country and we made it home on the flight, the original flight that we had set up for. But the only way we were really able to navigate some of that stuff is because we trusted the guide. We didn't try to figure it all out and solve it on our own. No, we followed where the guide was taking us. Now, as soon as we left the country, I'll never forget the flight back into the United States, and I realized that I was going to be facing all sorts of new and uncertain challenges. And the truth is, I didn't even have the foggiest idea of how complicated all of this was going to be. And so today, we feel stuck in some ways. And I want to share with you a framework that was really helpful for me when I was invited to become the lead pastor of our church. It was a framework that was given to me by some people who played the role of guide in my life. And it was really intended to help me find my way when there's so much uncertainty around you. It's based on the work of William Bridges. He wrote a book called Transitions, Making Sense of Life's Changes. He has a leadership version of this book that I would recommend for any of you who have to lead teams or lead initiatives or lead a new project, that gives some coaching on how to lead your team through this. And when I was invited to become the lead pastor, I knew it was a big change. I knew there was going to be uncertainty. They used terms like sacrificial lamb to describe the guy who takes over for the legend at the church, Lou Holt said, I don't want to follow the guy. I don't want to follow Woody Hayes. I want to follow the guy that follows him. It's like, and so here I am looking at my future going, how am I going to navigate a future that I don't even know what all of it's going to be like and how we're going to move forward. And so in order for us to move forward in a world of I don't know, we have to change the way that we think about change. That's William Bridges' premise. Here's what he says. Change is situational. Transition is psychological. Change, in other words, is an event that takes place. It's something that happens to you, and transition is the journey that we go on. Change is something that happens. Managing transition is optional. So if we're going to think about what we're facing right now and how do we move forward in a world of I don't know, we got to think about how we've been defining change versus transition. Change starts with or highlights something new. But what Bridges argues, if we're going to move our way forward, even if we have something new or something happens to us, if we're going to move our way forward, where the journey of transition really begins is not with the new thing that is starting, but it begins with an ending. That's where transition really begins. We really struggle in life to step into a new initiative at work, or maybe a new job, Or maybe a new season in your life at college, away from home. Some of you are getting ready to go to college, right? Or maybe a new life as a parent with a young child, or maybe a new life as a married couple, or maybe a new chapter as an empty nester, or maybe a new chapter as you're retired. We struggle with those seasons, not because of the new thing that's happened, but because we haven't acknowledged or we don't have a clear picture of what's ended. And until we spend some time clarifying what has ended, we'll never fully step into the new that is in front of you. And here's what's hard is we have to let go of old patterns and old sources of worth and identity, and sometimes old routines, and sometimes it means old friendships and old behaviors. And as we begin to experience these endings in light of the change that's happened into our life, what happens next, Bridges argues, is we end in this middle neutral zone. And so if time is moving this way, the first thing is a whole lot of endings, and then it moves into this, another word that he used for it is the wilderness. It's ambiguity, it's uncertainty. It feels like you're stuck in sand, you're disoriented. And even though this space is so challenging, and it is, it feels, we're not sure if any of this is making sense, it is full of unique opportunity to try and experiment and dream about new things in our life, which ultimately is what paves the way for you to experience fully the new beginning that you've been chasing. And so change is an event that creates an opportunity for us to bring some endings to things that need to end, or to acknowledge some things that have ended, to step into this wilderness of a neutral zone. Does this sound familiar from the story we were looking at last week, in order to step into the new beginning or the promised land. Now, this isn't just some author's take on how we navigate life's changes. This isn't just psychological babble. This is actually very biblical. It's a biblical principle that's been talked about or been demonstrated since the beginning of time. This is how we move forward in a season of uncertainty. This is how we keep from getting stuck. And within this, you're going to see the signs that help indicate that we're stuck. And so we're going to be focusing on these three different seasons or these three different stages over the next few weeks. But today we're going to start with endings. And the bottom line, if you're taking notes, is this. Sometimes you have to give up before you grow forward or go forward. Sometimes there's something that you have to give up, or an ending that needs to take place that you have to acknowledge, or maybe that you even have to initiate in order for you to grow forward to whatever is next. Or bottom line, number two, is this. You have to let go before you grow. I mean, this is just a principle. In order for you to grow in maturity or grow in a new season of your life, away from home, at college, new job, as a parent, as a married couple, as a grandparent, any of those things, there's just some things that you're going to have to let go of. And here's the problem. We just resist growing. We do. We actually resist the new because we don't want to let go of some of the old. We get stuck. And I think there are three indicators that point to the reality that you or I may be stuck. If you're taking notes, you can write these down. The three signs that you're stuck are this. You compare, you criticize, or you catastrophize. I like that word. You just say that in your head, catastrophize. If you're like 9, 10, or 11, you probably do this occasionally. You see your siblings do this, or you see your parents do this. All three of these are indicators that you're probably struggling with an ending, or you haven't acknowledged one. And here's what's amazing, is you see this happen throughout the Bible in all sorts of stories, in all sorts of examples. Remember, the Bible is a case book for life, not necessarily just a textbook for life. It's full of wisdom and principles that are helpful, but it's really full of stories of people who navigate the journey of faith or are navigating different changes through transition, and we get to learn from their stories. That's what the story of the Israelites is so compelling to me. God brought some freedom from slavery in Egypt. He used plagues. He parted the Red Sea. I mean, he showed up in a powerful way. He's a pillar of cloud. He's doing all of these amazing things in front of them, right? He's doing all of these amazing things. And at the first sign of challenge, at the first sign of difficulty, look at the Israelites' response. Didn't we tell you this would happen? While we were still in Egypt, we said, leave us alone and let us be slaves to the Egyptians. It's better to be a slave in Egypt than a corpse in the wilderness. We talked about this last week. What I wasn't able to talk about last week is what this really is demonstrating. This is comparison. This is a sign that they're stuck. They're not actually able to fully realize the freedom that they've stepped into, that they're no longer slaves because they're stuck comparing that with this. That is better than this. That's how comparison goes. It's like that car is better than this car. That body is better than this body. That job is better than my job. That house is better than my house. And if we're not careful, we start spending our life comparing ourselves, what we have, what we don't have, to everybody else. That person's getting more wins at work than I am. Or that's the person that I need to beat. That's the job that I need to have. That is better than this. And here's what's interesting. The thing that you're chasing, that you're out there comparing to your this, now has become your master. Yeah, I know you're not walking around going, I'm enslaved to that. But that's what's going on in your mind. You're stuck there. You can't escape from it. You can't stop thinking about it. You can't stop pursuing it. It has some sort of bondage over you. Essentially, what the Israelites were saying is slavery in Egypt was better than following God freely in the wilderness. Like they were willing to go back to slavery in Egypt than to move forward in the uncertainty that they were feeling in that moment. You know what's amazing is God graciously shows up and parts the Red Sea. And here's their response. Look at their response. It says, when the people of Israel saw the mighty power that the Lord had unleashed against the Egyptians, and they were filled with awe before him, before God, and they put their faith, they put their trust, they redirected their gaze back to the guide, their Lord, and in his servant Moses. Now, you would think, in that particular moment, they stopped comparing and they're like, oh, okay, maybe slavery in Egypt isn't better than following God out here in the wilderness. Maybe there's more to this God than I was originally giving him credit for. And so they begin to place their faith in him. And you would think that everything was better, that everything was all right. God is with us. He's leading us by pillar of fire and pillar of cloud. And what you see, the next chapter, they write a whole worship song to him. They celebrate him and celebrate all the mighty ways that God shows up. And then the very next verse after the worship song is this. When they came to the oasis of Marah, the water was too bitter to drink. So after the Red Sea, after this amazing moment where God showed up, they show up someplace and the water is bitter. It's got sediment. It doesn't taste right. It doesn't look right. And so what did they do? It's another challenge. So here's what they did. They called the place Marah, which means bitter. They labeled the place. Then the people complained and turned against Moses. So they turned against him. What are we going to drink here? They demanded. So the first thing that we do is we compare this with that, whatever it is out there with what I have here. The second sign that we're stuck is we start to criticize. We start to point out faults. And how do we do that? Well, we label, we turn against, and we demand. When things don't go our way, when something doesn't quite line up, we get stuck there when we just start pointing out all the things. It implies that I know better than you. I can see it all perfectly. Now, let me be clear. Thinking critically is different than being critical. Thinking critically oftentimes is how you overcome some of the challenges in your life. You're trying to think about it from multiple perspectives. Becoming a critical person is a position of pride, and it puts you in the seat of judge. It presumes that you see the whole picture and you've got it all figured out. And you get that wrong and you get that wrong and you get that wrong, and you start pointing out and declaring all of the wrong that you see around you. You start labeling people. You start turning against people. Well, they're in that camp. You start demanding things from people because you deserve it. It's a position of pride, of judgmental. It's a know-it-all, and it's a very lonely place. You can get stuck there, but you're going to miss. It's an indicator that you haven't dealt with an ending. Maybe an ending of something that you're ultimately trying to control in your life. And that's not the only sign that you see here. God shows up in this moment and Moses provides a piece of lumber. Some people call it Torah wood, or like God's word shows up in the water and purifies it. And there's actually trees whose seeds or berries begin to remove the sediment. I forget the name of them right now, but I'll have them in my notes for this weekend. And so there are ways to purify that stuff. And again, God shows up and provides. And you would think, okay, I'm going to start to trust again. But no, look at what it says. It says 1 month later, after leaving the land of Egypt, there too, the whole community of Israel complained about Moses and Aaron. Here they are complaining again, stuck again, the same problem again. In fact, they complain a lot through this whole journey. But look at what they say this time. They say, if only the Lord had killed us back in Egypt, that would be better, they moaned. There we sat around pots filled with meat and ate all the bread we wanted. But now you, thinking about God, have brought us into this wilderness to starve us all to death. A sign that you're stuck is you compare this with that. Another sign that you're stuck is you criticize all of the problems that you see around you. You label them, you call them out. The last one is you catastrophize. You imagine the worst possible outcome. It's rooted in cynicism. You dwell on it. You feel defeated. You feel stuck. It's a complete lack of trust. Nobody really has your best interest in mind. The only thing God wanted to do, they're saying, is to lead us out here into the wilderness, to starve us. I remember on my flight back from Honduras, this is where I got stuck. I started playing out all of the scenarios in my family's life and our church's life, and what does this mean for our country, and where are we headed? And I started swirling on the catastrophic, worst-case scenarios, and I had a hard time pulling my head above the fray. I remember thinking, leaving the country, I would feel peace, and suddenly when I was in the air, I thought, I don't know the kind of country I'm arriving to and what my future is. And I would say even today, I can get stuck in moments of catastrophizing the future and my family and all of this stuff. And so I want you to take a minute and figure out which one. Where do you get stuck? Do you get stuck comparing? Do you get stuck criticizing? Or do you get stuck catastrophizing what other people are navigating? What's amazing is the nation of Israel struggles throughout their entire journey into this land that God promised them. I mean, and if you think about it, God shows up and does miraculous plagues to demonstrate his power. He sends Moses, and Moses, his own story is so unique, as if it was written by God himself, set up by God himself. And these plagues, and then he's leading them with a pillar of cloud. He delivers manna when they need food from heaven, delivered from heaven. He delivers water from the rock. He provides trees that eliminate the bitterness. He parts the Red Sea. God keeps showing up time and time again. And yet, time and time again, they get stuck here the same way that you and I do. And here's the realization. The realization is this: even though they were out of Egypt, Egypt was not out of them. Even though they were out of Egypt, even though God was inviting them into a brand new life, a land flowing with milk and honey, as they would say, a beautiful new land, God knew that even though they were out of Egypt, there were some things in their life that needed to end in order for them to be able to step into the next thing that God had for them. That even though they now were free, that's the change, the transition that they needed to go through is they needed to learn how to live as free people. They had never been taught how to live and think independently as free people. They had never been taught how to set up a government. Egypt was their power, and they ruled by tyranny and by justice and by constantly comparing themselves to the slaves. And so comparison is a primary thought process that they went through. Egypt was predictable. It was a routine. They wanted the same kind of output every single day. And so what that did is that instilled learned helplessness in people, where they couldn't figure out how to troubleshoot water problems where it wasn't quite right. They had to be taught how to do that. Egypt was also a provider of food and water. Even if it was limited, they could depend on some of the things that were being provided to them. And so they had to move their focus to God being their provider. And how does he equip us to provide for ourselves? They had to go on a journey where even though they were out of Egypt, they had to learn how to get Egypt unstuck from inside of them. And I have a feeling that's the freedom journey that God has for you and me. And I think he could use COVID-19 to help you find freedom from things that are causing you to compare, to criticize, catastrophize, or some other way of getting stuck in a world of bitterness and disbelief and frustration and anxiety. John Maxwell said it this way at a leadership conference recently. He said, everything that you really want but you do not have is outside of your comfort zone. And so maybe what needs to end is your dependency on the comfort zone in order to experience what God has for you. Sometimes you have to let go before you grow. Sometimes you have to give up something before you grow forward into something new. And that's what our theme verse is all about. Last week I encouraged you to memorize it, and I want to bring it back up to revisit it again. Jesus says that my sheep listen to my voice. I know them personally, and they follow me as their God. Why? Because he says, I will give you eternal life. You will never perish. No one can snatch you away from me, for my Father has given them to me, and he is more powerful than anything else. One of the things that he taught is that he's going to lead us somewhere new. Our job is to listen to where he's inviting us to go. And Jesus demonstrated, not only did he demonstrate, he taught what this journey is going to look like. Here's what he said at one moment near the end of his life. He says, the time for me has come for the Son of Man to enter into his glory. To put this into context, he had just raised his friend Lazarus from the dead. Palm Sunday had just finished up, where basically Jesus was at the top of his game. He was TikTok famous. Everybody knew about him. He was on the front page of the newspaper, if you still read the newspaper. You know, all of that stuff. Everybody's talking about Jesus. And when he said glory, everybody around him was like, yeah, that sounds about right. I mean, everybody knows who Jesus is. This is his time. He's going to declare himself king. He's going to do something even bigger than everything that we saw. And notice real quick, notice what he didn't say. What he didn't say here is it's time to enter God's glory. He said, no, it's time for him. He's referring to himself to enter his glory. In other words, he is stepping into his purpose, God's dream specifically for him. That's something that you need to capture right there, that God has something glorious for you, specifically for you, a purpose for you. You're not an accident, and he wants you to step into that. And so everyone is leaning in. Jesus is about to step into his glory. What do we learn here? How is he going to do that? How do we do that in our life? And here's what Jesus says. He says, very truly I tell you, unless a kernel of wheat falls to the ground and dies, it remains only a single seed. You want to step into the glory, the dream, the purpose that God has for you? Jesus is like, hey, it's time for me to step into the glory, the purpose, the dream that God has for you. My time has come. And then he starts talking about a grain of wheat falling to the ground and dying. In that culture, they would have understood it. It's interesting because if you think about we are like wheat, right? The wheat spends its entire life pushing away from the dirt, trying to rise above the dirt, trying to rise up and grow into something tall and beautiful and big and noticeable for the world. But the best life, the new thing, the most meaningful thing, contribution that grain or that kernel of wheat, that wheat plant can do is to fall back down and to disappear. And that's what it means, to fall to the ground and disappear. If it doesn't do that, it can grow all it wants, and all it remains is stuck as a single seed. It says, you know what? If a kernel of wheat falls to the ground and dies, it remains alone, a single seed. But if it dies, you can go to the next slide. If it dies, it produces many new seeds. Other translations say a plentiful new harvest. In the New Living, it says a harvest of new lives. Sometimes you have to give up before you grow forward, before you go forward. You have to let go in order to grow. Your greatest life will come as you end. As you let some things fall to the ground. As you step into a neutral zone where you feel like things begin to disappear, you get a little disoriented, and then trust that through that process, God is going to show up and miraculously produce new life. Don't get stuck comparing, complaining, catastrophizing. Instead, realize that this is what God invites us into. I mean, that's what Jesus taught. Look at what he says. He says, those who love their life in this world will lose it, but those who care nothing for their life in this world will keep it forever. The world teaches you, you got to do it your way. You got to take care of you. Nobody else will take care of you. And it's a trap because you don't have enough control, enough power, and enough resources to do what you really want to do. And that presumes that your heart is actually, your motivation is actually good motivation, not just selfish. No, instead, let God be your guide and you experience something powerful. He goes on. He says, anyone who wants to serve me must follow me, because my servants must be where I am. In other words, if we call ourselves Jesus followers, we should expect some things in our life to end. We should expect seasons of wilderness. We should expect all of that and trust that God's going to use that to produce a new beginning. That when we know God, when we begin to know Him personally, He's going to invite us into the journey of finding freedom, of bringing endings to things in our life in order to experience something new. And as we begin to do that, it brings fresh clarity and power to the realization that we have a purpose, that God wants to make a difference through us. In fact, I want you to experience this firsthand. There was a life change story that we were able to capture through a couple of cell phones that just kind of highlight the journey that God invites each of us on and how He meets us in those places where sometimes an ending needs to take place before we can step into something new. And so Jess sat down with Cheryl to share her story with us. Let's watch.
I heard a little bit of your story yesterday, and a lot of it yesterday, and was wanting to ask more about, how you got started at Cedar Creek and what the time period looks like when you first found your faith and started coming here about 9 years ago.
That time for me was really grim. I was dealing with a lot of depression. At that time, I felt as though I had the weight in the world on my shoulders. I had a sick daughter, a business with probably about 16 to 20 employees, and my marriage had just totally fell apart. And it was one of the worst things that, to me, I thought that could have happened to me personally, because I believe so strongly in my marriage since I came from a broken home. I got me up an apartment, and during my commute back and forth from Perrysburg to work, I seen Cedar Creek. I would see it every day. Big old sign, and it was inviting. It was saying that they were catering to the hopeless and the unchurched. The advertisement it worked wonders. And I said, one day I woke up, I was feeling like I just told you earlier, just felt like the weight was on my shoulders, the world was on my shoulders. And I got up and I took a leap of faith, and I just walked through those doors one day. But I kept coming back. I kept coming back. Because that peace was definitely missing within me. When I became a Christian and when I became a believer and believed that, Jesus did die for our sins, and I asked God, to take me as one of His children, that at that time, it just feels like 1 minute I was empty, and the next minute I was filled. It was just like that fast, just because I asked. I had been attending Cedar Creek about 2 months, and I wanted to be connected. I signed up for a life group. It was for new believers, and it made such a large church a lot smaller. I actually got to know people. I met lifelong friends. They're wonderful. I could not imagine my life now without prayer, and the power of it. And before I was able to feel more connected with others, I'm able to talk it out. I do feel stuck a lot because I'm a caregiver of an adult child. Without God in my life, I don't know where I would be. Sometimes when I think that I'm gonna fall because of all the stress and anxiety, sometimes I just want to give up. And then God will, show His presence and let me know that there's another day. And usually another day, if I read a devotional or I read my Bible, I know that His presence is there to lift me up and to carry me through when I couldn't do it alone. I know sometimes, you just think that, that you'll never get to the other side, when your life feels hopeless. But I think through your faith journey and stay, keeping your eye on God first, that one day you will find yourself on the other side. I believe that. Yeah, because life has definitely not been easy for me, but God makes it possible. Makes it possible to truly change your life.
You get to touch a lot of kids' lives too.
And that is so important to me in order to, to be there for families. And I love being able to give back. I love being able to support others in their journey. I actually started a nonprofit, for single parents and their children. Sometimes they just need the support. I know, because I was a single parent for many years.
I mean, you're impacting a lot of people, so that's awesome.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
It's been a journey. And I'm just glad that part of my journey, I found myself there at CedarCreek. So I feel pretty good about that. I found a home.
Cheryl, I'm really glad that you are a part of our family here, and that you continue to make a difference through your life, but also make a difference through sharing your story. And I want to see more and more of you share your stories of life change, the journey that God has had you on, those of you that are taking your first steps, but also those of you who've been with us for years. What is it that God's teaching you today? It's those elements of that story that inspire us to not get stuck where we're at. Because that's how we're going to move forward and not get trapped in this cycle of complaining and comparing and catastrophizing in a season of uncertainty. So, Jesus invites us to remember that a grain of wheat, its full purpose is experienced when it falls to the ground and disappears. We know it now, it doesn't technically die, but that's what they thought. And out of that disappearance or under the burial, it produces plentiful new lives. And so as Jesus is sharing this, one of my favorite things that I've never really noticed quite the same way is what he says next. He's looking at his disciples. He's talking about his moment has come, and he says, now my soul is deeply troubled. He's honest. He's not just slapping a smile on the future that he sees in front of him. He knows that he's going to face some physical pain, some challenges, a physical ending. He can see it in advance. And so should I pray, Father, save me from this hour? Father, protect me. Father, provide for me. Could he pray that? Sure. He's saying, should I pray that? And then he says, but this is the very reason that I came. And so he invites God to give glory to his name through his life. So I think that's how we get out of the things that we're stuck in. Maybe you feel stuck right now. The first thing that you need to do is you need to name it. Jesus said, hey, my heart's troubled. I see a future that isn't going to be easy. He even grieved it. He's acknowledging the weight of it. My heart is deeply troubled. We need to take moments to grieve some of the things that have ended instead of constantly trying to go back and resurrect or redo. And then the last thing that we need to do is we need to let go of it. We need to release it. Because you have to let go before you grow. Because that's what we do. We have to give up before we grow forward. And this is the part of the process where God shows up. And when we do that, then we can start praying for purpose. But I'm getting a little ahead of myself. That's what we're going to talk about next week. How do we navigate the journey ahead? We'll save some of that for the week ahead of us. But right now, we just need to get a clear picture of some of the things that have ended. I would encourage you to take some time to do that, to just think about it, talk about it, reflect. What are those things? Let's not leave them ungrieved. Let's acknowledge them, but let's not get stuck there. Let's release them to God. And for some of you, you've just never taken your first step of faith. This is essentially what your first step of faith prayer ultimately looks like. You're acknowledging, Jesus, I need what you offer, and I confess that I've been trying to find salvation apart from you. And so today I'm releasing my life. I'm surrendering it to you to receive the forgiveness, the new life that you give. I want to follow you from this day forward. If you can't think of a time in your life where you made that decision, I think part of the reason you're here is to stop, is God's way of saying, stop staying stuck in this pattern, this life that you've been trying to solve on your own, and instead why don't you give up your attempts to be your own Savior and receive what God came to accomplish for you? If you can't think of a time in your life where you made that decision, I want to give you an opportunity right now. Pray this in the seat that you sit. Say this out loud with me right now. Jesus, I say it right now. I know it's weird. You're looking at a phone, but pray this out loud with me right now. If you've never surrendered your life to him, Jesus, I realize that I need what you offer. And I confess that I've been trying to find salvation apart from you. Today, I surrender my life to you and receive the forgiveness and the new life that you give. I want to follow you from this day forward. If you made that decision with us today, man, I would love for you to tell me, to tell us. We would love to get some resources to you to help you understand a little bit more of what the journey looks like, this life-changing adventure that God has for you. What are some of the signs and simple next steps that you can take? We'd love to snail mail you some stuff in the mail as well to help you with that journey. And for those of you who follow Jesus, maybe it's time to surrender and move on. And one of the ways that we're redirecting our focus is through that morning prayer. I'd invite you to pray purposefully with me every day over the next 2 weeks. We do it 21 days. We're going to be doing it for the next 2 weeks. And it's just going to be a way to not get stuck in the comparing, the criticizing, and the catastrophizing, but instead redirect your focus to God. Thanks.